Mr. Gray, that's my ruling.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I didn't make any mistakes up there.
Okay.
I don't want to do that.
All right. Okay. Let's get the jury,
Your Honor,
okay?
before we do that, if it is the defense's intention to call the defendant at this point, I think we have to make a proper record before that happens.
We already did.
I think I already asked Officer Potter whether or not she still wanted to testify.
I would just confirm that as of today, I would just make an additional record, Your Honor.
Well, is your decision the same?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you.
The jury is on the way back into the courtroom, and there you heard it, Kim Potter still intends to testify. That's it for me today, but coming up next, Julie Grant to help break it all down and bring you the latest. This is Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
Make publishing houses come to you. DiscoverPublishers.com gets you free access to the leading publishers in the industry, fast.
Call for your free publisher kits at 800-580-2044 and find the right publisher for your book. That's 800-580-2044.
Good Friday afternoon to you and welcome to Court TV Live. We are covering the trial of former Minnesota police officer Kim Potter, and there she is, the next witness called
And
by
Ms.
her
Potter,
defense
I
team,
gave the
the
rules for
defendant
testifying,
herself.
And you've been in the courtroom. Do you need for me to repeat them?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. State your full name and spell it.
Kimberly, Kimberlyann, Potter, Potter.
All right, counsel.
Thank you. Ms. Potter, will you speak into the mic? Because both of your lawyers have a hard time hearing.
Yes, there's just Kleenex here.
Okay. You stated your full name. How old are you, ma'am?
49.
And are you married?
Yes.
And is your husband in the courtroom?
Yes, he is.
And what's his name?
Jeff Potter.
And how long have you been married?
Over 25 years.
And when did you first meet your husband?
When I was 15.
And you're in high school?
Yes.
And did you reunite much later?
Yes, when I was in college.
And what does your husband do?
He works for a healthcare system now.
Is he a retired police officer also?
Yes, he is.
And where was he a police officer?
Fridley, Minnesota.
Was he also a member of a drug task force?
Yes, he was.
And with respect to your children, do you have children?
Yes.
And what are they, 2 boys?
I have 2 boys,
And what are their names?
Nicholas and Samuel.
And are they in the courtroom?
No, they're not.
And where is Nicholas?
He's an active duty Marine.
And where's that at?
He's currently stationed in Florida.
And your other son, where's he at?
He's in college in North Dakota.
And are they going to be home for the holidays?
Yes, they will.
Is your mother in the courtroom?
Yes.
And your sister?
No, she's not.
But is your brother in the courtroom?
Yes, he is.
And besides your brother and your mother, your father is deceased?
Yes.
And do you have any other siblings?
I have another sister and a brother.
And what are they, do you know what their ages are?
My sister, my oldest sister's in her 50s, and my other brother's in his 50s also.
And what do they do for a living?
My sister works for a medical device company. My oldest brother works for a parking company, and my other brother works for retail.
Going back to when you were a youngster, where did you go to elementary school?
Immaculate Conception Catholic School,
And where was that located or is located?
Columbia Heights, Minnesota.
And did you live in that neighborhood?
Yes, I did.
While you were at elementary school, while you were going to that school, did you have a police officer visit your school?
Yes.
And do you actually know his name today?
Yes, it's Officer Michael McGee,
And where was he a police officer
the
at?
Columbia Heights Police Department.
And why was he at your school?
He was doing bicycle safety for grade school kids.
And you remembered his name. Anything else that was significant about him that caused you to do something in your life?
He was, on that occasion, he really influenced me as a youngster that the police are good people, and I wanted to be something like that someday.
And because of that, and because of him being at your school, did you start out doing that?
Yes.
And what was your first job or volunteer work as some type of a law enforcement officer, student, explorer, school cop?
Well, the first thing I did was when junior high, was a school patrol officer, if that counts.
Yes, that does count. And what did a school patrol officer do back then?
It was junior high, so we helped the younger grade school age children get across the street.
And did you continue to do that throughout junior high?
Yes, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade.
And after getting into high school, what did you do?
The Fridley Police Department came to my high school and had a booth set up for the Fridley Police Explorers.
And did you join the Explorers?
Yes, I did.
Why did you join the Explorers? First of all, what is an Explorer?
It's part of the Boy Scouts of America. It's a area where you can have career enhancement, or you can learn about different jobs like law enforcement or firefighting, things of that nature.
And were you an Explorer throughout your high school days?
Yes, I was.
I can't remember if I asked you what high school you went to.
Totino Grace High School in Fridley.
With respect to criminal justice or law enforcement, while you were in high school, besides being an Explorer, did you do anything else?
I had jobs.
Okay, what was your job?
My first job was at a gas station.
What did you do there?
A clerk, cashier.
And did you continue that job throughout high school?
Yes, and into college.
Okay, so your next visit was college.
Yes.
Where did you go to college?
St. Mary's College in Winona, Minnesota.
And that's about, what, 70 miles from here, 80?
Yeah, it's down towards La Crosse.
Okay, it's in Winona.
Yes.
And what was your major at St. Mary's?
Criminal justice and sociology with an emphasis on elderly studies or geriatric sociology.
Why did you take those courses?
I wanted to go into law enforcement, and I had an interest in serving the older community and understanding their needs and wants.
Did you graduate from St. Mary's?
Yes, I did.
And was that a 3-year program, 4 years?
It was a 4-year program. I finished it in 3.5 because I had an internship in the summer.
And where did you internship?
The Columbia Heights Police Department.
Columbia Heights Police Department?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you do at the Columbia Heights Police Department?
I was assigned to an officer who was in their community-oriented policing program.
Did you also continue your Explorer career while in college?
I stopped being an explorer after my freshman year, and then I role-played at the annual conference.
What does that mean?
Every year, the Explorer program had an annual conference at Breezy Point Resort, and they needed role players, and they liked to use students or people that were in law enforcement.
So you graduated from St. Mary's,
Yes.
and what did you do after that?
After that, I would have gone to Skills in the summer of 1994.
Okay, and what do you mean by that?
I went to Skills.
What does that mean?
I went to the police certification program so I could
Where-
get hired.
And where was that at?
Alexandria Technical College?
In Alexandria, Minnesota?
Correct.
So everybody knows about 120 miles, 30 from
Yes.
here? And did you stay there while you were being educated?
Yes.
What kind of a program was that? How long was it?
It was 10 or 12 weeks.
And what do you mean, is that where you obtain your skills to apply as a police officer?
Yes, it was a hands-on training. I had the college education, the book knowledge, and then I went there for my skills program or my hands-on part from my getting my license.
After this program, did you go out and try and get a job in law enforcement?
Yes, I did.
And were you successful at first?
Yes.
Well, did you have a job at Anoka?
Yeah, I worked at the Anoka Metro Regional Treatment Center because I graduated in January, or I'm sorry, in December. I couldn't go to Skills until the next summer, so I had to I got a job.
All right, but you worked Skills, you were in Alexandria, correct?
Yes.
And the job you got was at Anoka State Hospital?
Yes.
That was between your Skills? Say that again.
So
Slowly.
I got hired there in February, and I worked for a year on a calendar year. But the Anoka City Police Department would allow their students to, or their employees, I'm sorry, to go to Skills and still have a job on weekends or when they would get back before they got hired as a law enforcement officer.
So at Anoka State Hospital, what did you do?
I was a security officer.
And Anoka State Hospital is for It's basically a detox center now, is that right?
No, it had a detox, it had a countywide detox and a detox program. It also had drug and alcohol abuse rehabilitation and mental illness.
And what did you do there? You're in security?
Yes,
Does that mean you had to deal with the folks that are staying there, the residents?
yes,
And were you successful in that?
yes.
All right, I'm being told we have to take a break. Don't go anywhere. We'll get you back into the courtroom in just 3 minutes. Welcome back. Kim Potter on the stand detailing her background. A couple impressive things mentioned during the break: that she was a crisis negotiator, meaning someone who would go in with the SWAT team, let's say, for instance, in a hostage situation and negotiate with the subject that was holding someone hostage. Also part of a domestic violence response team and part of the Law Enforcement Memorial
I did a lot of crime
Association's
prevention work
Honor
for our
Guard.
police department and other presentations.
Crime prevention presentations?
Yes.
What were those?
I was assigned an apartment complex in the city, and I would meet with management, and we would do some programming for their residents as far as personal safety, locking your car doors, taking valuables out of your cars, just regular safety in an apartment complex. And then I would do some other presentations on robbery prevention for banks in the city.
By the way, when you were doing the carrying caskets for that, in that program, were you aware of officers that were killed in the line of duty by making a traffic stop?
Yes, Sean Patrick from Mendota Heights.
Objection, Your Honor. Move to
strike, and a go.
The objection is overruled. I'll let the answer stand.
During your 26 years as a police officer, did you ever receive any complaints for abusing your power?
No,
Did you ever receive any complaints from the public?
no,
In training, did you attend all the training sessions required by the Brooklyn Center Police Department while you were there?
yes,
And with respect to gun training, laser training, you attended all those too, right?
yes, I did.
And did you pay attention?
Yes, I did.
With respect to that, in your approximation, and I'm not asking for exact numbers, but with respect to the training, what would you say the amount of training was for the firearm, for the gun, and the amount of training for the laser? What would be the percentages there?
For the firearms, it would be probably 80%. We spent a lot more time on firearms than we did on Taser.
And tasers didn't come into the being until years after you're a law enforcement officer, right?
Yes, I believe trainers in this courtroom had said 2002 or 2003,
And you started as a law enforcement officer, what year?
1995.
With respect to tasers, I say lasers, respect to tasers, there's been evidence in the case that you had a Taser 7, is that correct?
Yes,
And the evidence in that was that the Taser 7 was shaped like a gun, fair statement?
yes,
And the Taser 7 had a dark black, or at least a dark handle, and a dark top. Do you remember that?
Leaving.
I'm trying to.
The objection is overruled. You may answer.
yes,
The Taser that you received, was it approximately a month before April 11th that you received this Taser? Do you remember?
in the courtroom, I was told I received it on March the 26th.
Okay. And also, while we're there, with respect to these tasers and testing them, the rule that we read said should test the electronics every day. Is that right?
Yes,
And there is testimony that you didn't test yours a couple days. Is that right?
yes, that's what I was told.
And do you agree with that you didn't test it?
I don't recall if I would have or wouldn't have.
And was that an important feature for law enforcement officers with new tasers
No,
that never used them since they had them?
correct.
And while we're there, did you ever use a taser, use it by actually shooting it in all of your years' career as a law enforcement officer?
I would take my Taser out on rare occasions, but I don't believe I ever deployed it.
Okay, when you take your taser out, it's to de-escalate what is going on. Is that a fair statement?
Sometimes, or to prepare for what might be behind a door. Sometimes an officer has a gun and sometimes an officer has a Taser out.
All right. And now the taser that was switched from you, did that go to one of your partners, that taser?
My old Taser,
Yes.
I believe they were just put in storage at the police department.
And those tasers were all yellow, right? The
Yeah.
handle, the top, the whole thing was yellow?
Yes, except for the battery pack, I believe that was black, and there was some
Okay.
markings on the side.
I'm going to show you these tasers. Show you this taser.
Objection, may we have a sidebar, please?
Yes.
While they're at Sidebar, we're going to take a break. Don't go anywhere. We're back in the courtroom live right after this. Let's go back into court.
Did you pull up in back of, or not you, Officer Lucky was driving the car, right, the squad?
Yes,
And you were the FTO. Where were you seated in the car?
in the passenger seat.
And tell the jury what you remember about first seeing the white Buick on that day, approximately 2 p.m. And
I would-
talk slowly.
Officer Lucky and I were driving south on Zane Avenue North. We were talking about pursuit policies, doing some regular FTO training, and he observed a vehicle in the turn lane with a blinker on inappropriately.
And was that the white Buick?
Yes,
And did you have a conversation with him about that?
yes.
And what was that conversation?
We discussed a little bit of suspicious activity. He noticed a pine tree or air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror, and the tabs were expired.
And did you stop that vehicle?
Officer Lucky wanted to stop the vehicle, yes.
And let me ask you a sort of a hypothetical. If you had been working alone that day on Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock, would you have stopped the vehicle for?
Objection, relevance, calls for speculation.
I can't even finish the question, Your Honor.
All right.
That's not fair.
The
It's
obj-
simply, they know how to try a lawsuit, I would
Okay.
think.
The objection is overruled. You may answer.
My question was, if you weren't with a field training officer that day and you were on patrol alone, would you have stopped that vehicle?
Most likely not.
And why not?
An air freshener to me is not, it's just an equipment violation. And during the COVID times, the high COVID times, the Department of Motor Vehicles was so offline that people weren't getting tabs, and we were advised not to try to enforce a lot of those things because the tabs were just not in circulation.
Okay, but you did stop the vehicle, right?
Yes, part of field training is that my probationer would make numerous contacts with the public throughout the day.
And what happened after the stop? Or if you remember, go ahead.
Before Officer Lucky stopped the car, he ran the vehicle, confirmed that the registration was expired and that the registered owner had a petty misdemeanor type warrant for some type of drug offense.
And that was the registered owner of the vehicle.
Yes,
So you did that while you were still in the squad car and not,
yes, it's part of the multitasking that a probationer will have to do, is run a vehicle license plate, call into dispatch, and initiate their lights.
okay, try and talk a little slower. I know you're probably nervous, but I'd like to get all this in. All right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you stopped the vehicle, is that right?
Officer Lucky initiates the traffic stop.
And what happened after he did that?
The vehicle stopped kind of in an entrance to the church on 63rd, and he got on the PA and told the vehicle to pull ahead just a short distance.
Was that because he was parked in the driveway of the,
Yeah, and I think there was a vehicle trying to come out, as I recall.
okay. What happened next?
Officer Lucky and I exited our marked squad car. Officer Lucky walked up to the driver's door, and I stood at the right rear corner of the white Buick.
So you did get out of the car.
Most definitely.
And why did you stand where you were standing?
Part of it was so I could see where Officer Lucky was, and to provide cover to see what else was in the vehicle.
In your experience of 26 years and being a patrol officer all those years, is stopping any vehicle at any time that you don't know, does that be considered a dangerous situation?
Yes.
Why?
Sometimes there's guns in the car, sometimes there's uncooperative people. You don't know who you're stopping.
Yeah, because you don't know, right?
Right.
So while you were standing there in the rear of the vehicle, did you hear what Officer Lucky said?
I could hear parts of the conversation. He didn't seem to be in any distress when he was asking questions. He took out his notepad, and it looked like he was writing down something which would end up being a name and a date of birth.
Okay, and after he did that, did you two go back to the squad car?
Yes.
And at some point in time during the stop or right after it, did Officer Lucky do anything in connection with obtaining another squad car?
Yes, he called for a second car to come.
What is that about? What?
It would just be a backup officer. The registered owner had a warrant of some nature. It wasn't a bad warrant, it was just a regular petty warrant, which would still, you'd want a second officer. Or I guess in this case, a third officer. Officer Lucky and I are considered only one officer.
And why are you and Lucky just one officer?
Because he's in field training and he's a probationary employee.
All right. So did the third officer, Officer Johnson, arrive at some point in time?
Yes, Sergeant Johnson arrived.
And was that before you looked up in the computer about this driver of the vehicle, or after?
I don't know exactly when he arrived. I know Officer Lucky and I were Officer Lucky and I were discussing running the name he was given through some various systems.
Okay, and did you do that, you and Officer Lucky?
Yes.
Was there any correction that you told him about during this time that he shouldn't have put the name in one?
He had gone to the Minnesota, because the driver didn't provide him with any government-issued ID, he would have had to verify some information to run him properly in our system through TriTech. So you run them sometimes through Minnesota DVS. With just a name and a date of birth, it'll give you a Soundex hit on various people with that either same name or common name with a date of birth.
So did you correct him on that?
We were talking about, I don't know if I corrected him on it, but
So what happened after that? Did
he
you-
would copy the OLN, which is a driver's license number, off the screen and then put it into our TriTech system or CAD, and that would run him through the state for driver's license and warrants and other hits.
And did you find anything about the driver?
The driver came back with a suspended driver's license, gross misdemeanor, bench warrant for weapons, and a protection order.
So a gross misdemeanor for weapons ordinance, what went through your mind, if anything, when you read that?
It would be concerning that there'd be a weapon on the person or in the vehicle.
And why would that be?
In my experience over 26 years, I have found guns in cars, either by accident or by them just sitting out in plain view.
And what about a person with a weapons warrant? Would that-
They're more likely to be carrying a weapon or have a weapon access to them.
So, what about the was it a temporary restraining order that came up? Was that it? Or-
Yeah, I think they're called ex parte orders. It would be a temporary protection order until the parties would either have a court hearing in front of a judge to make it a permanent order.
And there would be a name of a female on that?
Yes,
order?
there was.
And was there a female in the Buick or in the automobile that was stopped?
Yeah, in the front, yes, in the front passenger seat.
So after you learned that, did you also learn something, did Officer Lucky tell you something about drugs or marijuana?
When he initially got back to the car, he told me there was a obvious smell of marijuana and some seedlings or shake residue on the center console and inside the vehicle.
Okay. So with all of that information, what did you do next?
Officer Lucky explained to Sergeant Johnson what was going on. I corrected.
Where was Sergeant Johnson? Was he in your squad car?
He was standing at my passenger door.
Go ahead.
And Officer Lucky was explaining to Sergeant Johnson what was happening and what he wanted to do. Officer Lucky only told Sergeant Johnson that he had a warrant. And I told Officer Lucky that he needed to tell Sergeant Johnson what the warrant was for. A weapons violation warrant would be cause for care and concern.
All right. And after that conversation, what happened, if anything, next?
We got out of the vehicle. Sergeant Johnson was going to the passenger side. And Sergeant,
Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt you. Back up a little, I'm getting ahead of me. What was the plan when you got out of your vehicle with Lucky and Johnson was outside? What was your plan?
The plan was for Officer Lucky to get the driver into custody for the warrant, and we'd further investigate with the female who she was and if she was the petitioner or the subject of the restraining order.
Were you required by policy and law in learning about that warrant to arrest the driver of that car?
Yes, it was an order of the court.
And with respect to the restraining order, or whatever you called it, did proper police procedure that you knew of for 26 years required to find out who that lady was?
Yes,
And why would that be?
it's my duty to find out who she is to make sure she's not in harm's way. There's been times when that hasn't happened and somebody has ended up killed because that wasn't followed.
So now we're at the Buick, it's a Buick car, white car, is that
It's a
right?
white car.
And now we're at the white car, and you three went up to it, correct?
Yes, Sergeant Johnson went
Where-
up to the
where did
passenger
Johnson
side.
go?
He went up the passenger side to provide cover.
And what does provide cover mean?
Keep an eye on the occupants of the vehicle, and just to monitor what's happening outside in the world. See if
And-
people are walking up on you or things go wrong.
And where were you located?
I was towards the left rear corner of the car.
And where was Officer Lucky?
He was advancing to the driver's door.
And how, by the way, before this, how long had you known Officer Lucky?
I think we were on our 5th shift.
And he was pretty new arrival, was he? Or,
I believe he was in 2nd phase maybe, but he had been a police officer before.
okay, what does second phase mean?
He wasn't in his initial 4 weeks, he was in the start of his second 4 weeks. He was-
And you testified, you knew at least back then, that he had come from another police department, correct?
Yes, I think he worked at 2 previous agencies and he was an explorer.
Okay. Now let's go back to when you three arrived at the white car. We've already said where you're located. Officer Lucky was at the driver's door, is that right?
Yes, he would have been standing behind the post between the driver's door and the rear passenger door.
What do you mean by that, standing behind the post?
He wouldn't have been directly in front of the door because that would be unsafe approach.
And this was this a warm day? Was the window down? Remember?
I don't know if the window was down or not.
Okay. But in any event, where were you standing again?
At the left rear corner.
And did you hear what Officer Lucky said?
Yes, I heard him ask the driver to step out of the vehicle a couple of times.
And did the driver step out of the vehicle finally?
Finally, he asked Officer Lucky a couple of times what was going on, and Officer Lucky said he would explain to him.
When he got out of the car?
Yes,
And so did the driver get out of the car?
yes.
And what do you remember happening next?
Officer Lucky had him turn around, and I think he was still asking what was going on. Sergeant
Who's he?
John,
Who's he?
the driver,
Go ahead.
and Sergeant Johnson and Lucky told him he was under arrest, and I told him he had a warrant.
Okay, so who said he was under arrest first?
Sergeant Johnson, I believe.
And Sergeant Johnson testified here, you remember that?
Yes.
And after he said that, did Officer Lucky say he was under arrest too?
Yes.
And you heard that?
Yes.
And what did you say then?
I told him he had a I told him he had a warrant.
You just said warrant.
I think so.
Did you specify what kind of warrant, if you remember? If you don't,
I don't think I would have. It wouldn't have been in my normal.
okay, so what happened after Johnson and Lucky said you're going to be handcuffed or you're under arrest, and you said that there was a warrant? What happened next?
Officer Lucky had him put his hands behind his back, and I noticed that in the driver's right hand was something. It was paper or something, and I took it out of his hand and had it in my left hand.
And you had that in your left hand?
Yes.
And then what happened next? Strike that. When you did that, I take it you got closer to the driver?
Yes. I reached into the driver's hand and took out what he had in his right hand. And had it in
Right
my-
hand or left hand?
His right hand, and I held it in my left hand.
Okay. And what happened next?
Officer Lucky started to say something about, don't do that, don't tense up, stop doing that. And then it just went chaotic.
What do you remember happening after that?
I remember a struggle with Officer Lucky and the driver at the door. The driver was trying to get back into the car.
Well, he was trying to get back in the car. What did you do?
I went around Officer Lucky as they're trying to get back in the door. I'm between the door and Officer Lucky and the driver. And the driver's getting into the car.
And what happened next?
They're still struggling, and I can see Sergeant Johnson and the driver struggling over the gear shift, because I can see Johnson's hand, and then I can see his face.
And you knew Johnson for many years before this, is that right?
Yes.
And by looking at his face at that point in time, what did you interpret it to mean?
He had a look of fear on his face, it's nothing I'd seen before.
Did you say anything when you saw this? What did you do?
We were struggling. We were trying to keep him from driving away. It just went chaotic. And then I remember yelling, "Taser, taser, taser," and nothing happened. And then he told me I shot him.
Can you proceed or you?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay. After the driver said you shot him, do you remember what you said, or do you, if you don't remember, did you look at the video and see what you said? Or do you actually remember what you said, I guess is my question, not with help from a video?
I don't remember what I said.
And what do you remember next, if anything?
They had an ambulance for me, and I don't know why. And then I was at the station. I don't remember a lot of things afterwards.
Do you remember saying something about prison?
No.
If you did say that, do you have any idea now why you would say that?
No.
Was the climate back then about police officers a little rough?
Objection, Your Honor.
The objection is sustained.
All right. You don't remember saying it,
No.
and you don't know why you said it.
No.
Do you remember the response that our Sergeant Johnson or Major Johnson gave you?
No.
And when next do you remember what happened, if anything, if you remember?
I remember getting an ambulance, and then I was at the station.
Okay. And you remember being in the ambulance, arriving at the station?
No.
You don't remember the
No.
station?
I remember getting to the station.
Once you got to the station, do you remember what happened next?
The next thing I remember is Officer Fricky was in the room with me
And where were you located? Do you remember that?
in the front office.
Okay. In the front office room, do you remember, were you sitting down, standing up?
I was on the floor.
And after that, at some point in time, did your husband show up?
Yes.
At what time do you believe, from back there, April 11th, at what time do you believe that your memory came back to you?
Probably when my husband got there. So much of it is missing.
After that night, and for the last few months, have you been in therapy?
Yes.
And did you still work as a police officer there?
No,
Did you quit?
I did.
And this was your career?
Yes.
And when did you quit?
A day or two after the incident.
And why did you quit?
There was so much bad things happening. I didn't want my coworkers, and I didn't want anything bad to happen to the city.
And did you own a home in Anoka or Hennepin County at the time?
Yes.
You and your husband?
Excuse me,
The objection is relevant.
The objection is overruled.
Did you own a home, your family home, for years past?
Yes.
And did you sell it?
Eventually?
Before you sold it, did you move out of the state?
Yes.
And do you now live out of state?
Yes.
We have a moment, Your Honor. Thank you. I'm done, Your Honor.
Is Albert Cross?
Good morning, Ms. Potter.
Good morning.
You've been a police officer, or were a police officer for 26 years. Isn't that
Yes.
right? You said you started in 1995,
Yes.
and that was with the Brooklyn Center Police Department for that entire career, right?
Yes.
And you said that you resigned from the Brooklyn Center Police Department, right?
Yes.
And that was on April 12th of this year, right?
Yeah, within a day or two of the incident.
Right after you had shot and killed Daunte, right?
Yes.
And throughout that time period, you were a licensed peace officer, right?
Yes.
And to become licensed, you had to go through a number of requirements. Fair?
Yes.
You had a college degree.
Excuse me, Your Honor, could the prosecutor speak into that mic too?
Sure.
Thank you.
You have a college degree, right?
Yes.
And you also had to complete the peace officer education program, that skills component that you talked about.
Yes.
And that included skill sets and classroom training as well.
Yes.
You had to pass an exam to become an officer.
Yes.
And then you did all that before you started with the Brooklyn Center Police Department in '95, right?
Yes.
And then you got your license through the post board, correct?
Yes.
And that stands for Peace Officer Standards and Training.
Yes.
So you were licensed throughout that whole 26-year career, right?
Yes.
And you maintained all of the requirements to keep your license,
Yes.
including all the training that was required for it as well, right?
Yes.
And that training that's required for your license has all different kinds of components, true?
Yes.
You have things like use of force, use of firearms, tasers, all kinds of things.
Yes.
And you did all that training.
Yes.
And you did all that every year throughout that 26-year period, right?
Yes.
Sometimes multiple times a year, right?
Yes.
And all of those requirements were in place to make sure that you were at the beginning of your career and continued to be, competent and capable of performing the requirements of the job, right?
Yes.
You mentioned on direct that you were also a hostage negotiator as part of your duties, right?
Crisis negotiator.
Crisis negotiator. Did that involve some hostage type situations?
I've never had a hostage situation.
Okay, but crisis negotiation.
Yes.
And that involved some de-escalation tactics, I presume, correct?
Yes.
And you had to develop that skill set and be pretty good at de-escalating situations as a crisis negotiator, fair?
Yes.
So you had some experience in stressful situations doing that?
No.
So you were a crisis negotiator but never experienced a stressful situation?
We talk to people.
Talk to people in crisis.
Yes.
And part of your job as a police officer is dealing with people on their worst days, right?
Yes.
People who don't want to cooperate with you sometimes, right?
Most of the people we talk to in crisis are either barricaded behind a door or talking to you from another room.
Okay, for 26 years you were a patrol officer, right?
Yes,
So you saw people out on the street every day as part of your job duties? Fair?
yes,
And you talked about doing a lot of traffic stops during that career, correct?
I did some traffic stops.
Okay. Well, in some of those cases, there are people who have weapons, right?
Yes,
Sometimes people want to flee, right?
yes,
Sometimes people are violent.
yes,
And all of that's part of being a police officer, dealing with people in those situations, right?
yes,
You'd agree that you're bound by policy and the requirements of the job that Brooklyn Center, the police department, sets for you, right?
yes,
And you heard Commander Fleslin testify, but you had to acknowledge those policies and essentially agreed to abide by them every year you were an officer, fair?
yes,
And you'd agree that your fundamental duty as a police officer is to safeguard life, right?
yes,
And you also have the duty to never employ unnecessary force, true?
yes,
Part of the policy also includes some of your responsibilities as an officer, right?
yes,
And that includes being alert and attentive and capable of performing your job, right?
yes,
And getting back to the training and sort of the post requirements, there's a lot of training that goes into being a police officer, fair?
yes,
And we talked about a couple of those things, but one of those subjects is use of force, right?
yes,
And use of force can include things like restraints, handcuffs, defensive tactics, chemical irritants using batons, tasers, less lethal weapons, and firearms as well, right? All those things are options available to you. True?
not all of them.
Okay, well, you carry a whole number of things on your duty belt every day, right?
Yes,
And that includes a firearm and a taser, right?
yes,
And you also had other items on that duty belt as well, correct?
yes,
And as part of the training that you went through every year, they cover topics of all kinds of uses of force, right?
yes,
Including the things on your duty belt and maybe other options that the department could use additionally, true?
only the things I was assigned on my duty belt.
Okay. But in any case, that use of force training was a pretty key component of being an officer, right?
Yes,
You were trained about when you could use force, how much force to use, and what would be appropriate force. Fair?
fair,
And not only were you trained on that, but you had a lot of policy that that dictated what you could and could not do in a particular situation, right?
yes,
And you were also trained on the readiness aspects of use of force, right? Being ready to engage whatever force might be required, right?
yes,
Including making decisions under stress, right?
what do you mean?
Well, you had a lot of scenario-based training, right?
Yes,
And in those situations, those scenarios were set up to be as close as they could be to real life, right?
I suppose,
So you would be trained to have to make decisions in the moment about what to do and what force to use, right?
Well, it was a training situation, so it was usually slow and meticulous and controlled.
Well, you did this year after year, right, for the entirety of your career, correct?
I think scenario-based training started later, probably the last 10 or 15 years.
Sure, but use of force training has been around for a long time, right?
Yes,
Because since you started as a police officer, you have, in some cases, had to use force, true?
yes,
And there are limitations on how and when to use that force, right?
yes,
So you've had training on that throughout your entire career, right?
yes,
And as part of that process, the way that it's required for you to maintain your license is that you sign in and you sign off on attendance forms, and you basically, you have to be there, right? You can't not be there, right?
Right.
And every year you have a certain number of training hours that are required, right?
Yes.
And you said on direct that you participated and you were paying attention during all those trainings, true?
Yes.
And some of those trainings had classroom instruction, PowerPoints, things like that, right?
Yes.
Some of them also included reviewing policies and other documents, right?
Yes.
And then there was also the hands-on training with the practical components, things like using drawing weapons, things like that, right?
Yes.
And over the course of your career, you completed many,
Time for a
many,
quick
many
break. We'll get
hours
you
of
back
training.
live in the courtroom next. Let's go back in for the cross-examination of Kim Potter. They're focusing on the Taser policy.
We talked about it.
It was part of your PowerPoints, correct?
Yes.
You were made aware during PowerPoint after PowerPoint after PowerPoint that drawing and firing the wrong weapon can happen, right?
We were told it wasn't something that they expounded on.
You were told that.
Yes.
And you signed documentation every year you were certified acknowledging that you knew the risks, received and reviewed the materials required for you to carry that taser, correct?
Yes, I signed the documents.
Okay. Now, in terms of the carrying of these weapons, reaction side means what for you?
That would be my left hand.
Okay, you're right-handed?
Yes.
So carrying a taser, you have done for years on your left side, correct?
Yes.
And your firearm you carry where?
On my right side.
How many years have you carried your firearm and your taser that way?
My firearm for 26 years and my taser, according to your documents, for 19.
So as long as you've had that taser, you've carried it on your left side, correct?
In the beginning, I carried it on my right side in a drop holster.
And when did you switch?
When we were given new holsters?
And when would that have been?
I don't know.
Okay. But far before 2016, you saw the images that were up in court. Long before that, you were carrying your taser on your left side, correct?
Yes.
Years and years, right?
Yes.
We talked a little bit about reality or scenario-based training. When you go through those trainings, you have available to you all the options that would be on your duty belt, right? Although inert for the purposes of training, right?
Yes.
And the purpose of that training is to try to recreate real-life stressful situations as best as possible to practice making those types of decisions in the moment. Fair?
Fair.
Let's talk a little bit about your taser. You'd agree that the Taser 7 that you have and the Taser you had before that has a safety mechanism on the side of it, right?
Yes.
And you have to flip it up to arm the Taser.
Yes.
And when the Taser is on and armed, it beeps, right?
I don't know if it beeps.
There's a display screen that turns on.
Yes.
And then there are two lasers with the Taser 7 that appear on your target, right?
Yes.
A green one for the top probe, right?
I believe so. It was a new taser.
And a red one for the bottom?
I would guess so, yes.
Well, you were trained on it, right?
Yes, but it was a while back.
Well, you were
been a long-
trained in March of this year on that Taser, correct?
Yes.
And you had to successfully operate and handle that Taser in order to be certified to use it, correct?
Yes.
And you went through that hands-on process of turning on that Taser and safely handling that Taser in order to be certified, correct?
Yes, in March.
In March. And before that, you had had an X26P, correct?
Yes.
And that Taser also had a laser and a safety and things like that, right?
Yes.
The screen that turned on.
Yes.
And the Taser, and that was the Taser that you had been carrying for years before, right?
Yes.
Very similar to the Taser 7 in that way.
Similar but different.
All right, so I'm going to put on the screen next to each other, please, Exhibits 210 and Exhibit 212. Now, this is a picture, side-by-side pictures of you on April 11th, correct?
Yes.
And your Taser is pictured on the left side of your duty belt, correct?
Yes.
And that's the way you'd been carrying it for years and years, correct?
Yes.
And your firearm you carried on the right side of your duty belt, right?
Yes.
And you'd agree that the standard procedure for a reaction side, left-hand draw for your Taser in this case, would be to draw that weapon with your left hand, correct?
Yes.
All right, you can take that down. You were asked some questions on direct about spark testing, the function test of the taser. The policy says that you should do that before the beginning of every shift, right?
Yes,
And you didn't do it the last 2 shifts that you worked, correct?
that's what the documents say.
Right. You didn't do one for the last 4 of your last 10 shifts that you worked, in fact, correct? If that's what the documents say.
Which dates?
You didn't do it on March 27th, correct?
I guess.
You didn't do it on March 28th.
Your Honor, I object to this cross-examination if she doesn't know. She should
All
have-
right,
she should have-
okay, one word objections, please. If she doesn't know, she can say she doesn't know.
If the documents show that you didn't do a spark test 4 of your last 10 shifts, you have no reason to dispute that, right?
No.
And the day of this incident on April 11th, you didn't do a spark test that day, right?
No. According to the documents.
And even though, yeah, that day was a slow and uneventful day at the beginning of the day, right?
I don't know, I don't have a log.
Well, you told Dr. Miller that that day started as a slow and uneventful Sunday, right?
I don't know if I did or not.
Council sidebar.
We're going to take a break while they're at the sidebar. Stay right here with Court TV Live. Here we go, back in for more of the cross-examination of Kim Potter.
Okay. No reason to dispute that the Brooklyn Center Police Department used long-range cartridges in the Taser 7, correct?
No,
And the reason to do that would be so that you could fire at a farther distance with your Taser, and you wouldn't need to approach someone up close, correct?
I don't know. I would assume so, but I'm not positive.
Well, that's why someone would use a long-range cartridge as opposed to a short-range cartridge, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And you've been trained on Taser since 2002, correct?
yes.
You know how they work, right? And you know
Yes.
what they do. Could we take those down, please, and put up Exhibit 214? Okay, Exhibit 214 that's been admitted is on the screen. Is this a picture of your duty belt?
Yes,
You'd agree that the holsters for your Taser and your firearm are different, correct?
yes,
And your firearm holster is empty in this picture, right? There's no firearm in it.
correct.
Is that this right here?
Yes,
The Taser holster is made of plastic, right?
yes,
You have to push a button, this button right here, and rock it back to get it out of the holster, correct?
yes,
And your gun holster is made of leather, is that right?
yes,
And it has a little snap, is that right?
yeah, yes.
And how does that gun come out of that holster?
It would rock forward.
How do you pull it with your hand out of your holster?
It would rock forward and you would pull it up.
Okay. And the Taser, on the other hand, you would depress the button, rock it backward and pull it up, correct?
Yes,
All right, if we could take that down, thank you. Now, you testified that you have never deployed your Taser or your firearm while on duty out on the street, correct?
not that I recall. I know for sure my firearm.
Okay. But you have drawn your Taser multiple times while on duty, correct?
Several times.
And you said that you did that as a way to de-escalate. I believe that was your testimony on direct.
Yes.
And approximately how many times did you pull your Taser but not deploy it while on duty?
For de-escalation, maybe a few times.
Now, there are a couple times that you pulled your Taser and didn't deploy it. One was in 2013, correct? No reason to dispute that it happened once in 2013 at least.
I would guess no reason.
There was a situation where one of your colleagues, a former officer, was hanging on the back of an individual, and you pointed the Taser at him, but didn't tase him because you would have tased your fellow officer. Is that right?
If it's the one I'm thinking, yes.
And instead of
She was on his back.
deploying your Taser, you called for extra help, correct?
Yes, and we probably continued to fight with him.
You never deployed your Taser then.
No.
And there was another incident in 2016 where someone was not complying with commands to place them under arrest, right?
I don't know what event you're talking about.
Well, in this case, there was an individual who was struggling, a female individual. She didn't want to get in handcuffs, and then one of the officers took her down to the ground by force, correct? And you pointed your Taser but didn't deploy it, right?
If that's what the documents say, I don't recall the incident.
Okay. But you recall that you have drawn your Taser and not fired it in your 26-year career.
Yes.
All right, I'd like to talk a little bit more about April 11th. So, on April 11th, you were serving as an FTO, right?
Yes.
And you said that you have done that for 10 or 15 years.
For many years is I don't remember when I got certified, but it's been many, many years.
Okay. And you said that on direct, I believe your testimony was that you had knowledge to impart and that mentorship skills that made you suited for that job, right?
Yes.
So you were serving as Officer Lucky's FTO on April 11th. How long had you been his FTO?
I believe it would be 5 shifts. It would have started the Monday after Easter Sunday.
Okay. But you were essentially in a supervisory position, right? Serving as his FTO.
Yes, I guided him.
It's a big responsibility, true?
Yes.
You have to be a good example, sort of set the stage for what a good police officer should do in any particular situation, right?
Yes.
And to do the job of an FTO, you have to be really familiar with policy and training and proper uses of force, right?
Yes.
And you have to make sure that someone else is doing it all right too, right?
Correct.
And you testified that that morning, the morning of April 11th, you reviewed pursuit policy with Officer Lucky, correct?
That afternoon.
Okay. But that pursuit policy includes not shooting at the driver or occupants of a vehicle, right?
A moving vehicle.
And you told Officer Lucky, we're not in the city, right? Did you tell Dr. Miller that you told Officer Lucky in reviewing pursuit policy, you used the phrase, we're not in the city?
Because we're on Zane Avenue, which is in Brooklyn Park.
And why did you say that?
To remind him of geographical boundaries.
And you were also reminding him of the limitations of the pursuit policy, correct?
What do you mean?
That you can't just get into a high-speed car chase or shoot up a car without specific reasons, right?
Yes, for our pursuit policy limits what we can pursue for.
And a gross misdemeanor warrant doesn't qualify for a vehicle pursuit, right?
Not according to our policy.
And you had just reviewed that policy with Officer Lucky that day, correct?
Yes.
So getting to what happened with the stop, you said that there was a turn signal misplacement, perhaps. You saw the wrong turn signal. That was the first thing that you saw?
Officer Lucky saw it first.
Okay, so you didn't see the wrong turn signal. But after that, you saw the air freshener, right?
I saw the expired registration.
Well, you had said on direct that you would not have pulled that vehicle over, right?
Probably not.
And you said that you knew that there had been some delays because of COVID with people getting their tabs up to date, right?
Yes.
But you also mentioned the air freshener to counsel on direct, didn't you?
Yes.
But regardless, expired tabs, air freshener, this is the kind of traffic stop that is pretty routine for you in your 26 years as a cop, right?
No traffic stops routine, but it would have been something I would have done several times.
I'm sure you've seen lots and lots of cars with air fresheners and expired tabs. True?
Yes.
And then the decision was made to pull over the car. You mentioned that there was some information that maybe there was some other warrant that you learned about around that time. You didn't discuss any of that with Officer Lucky, did you?
He would have had the same warrant hit that I would have heard.
None of that was mentioned. None of it was even worth discussing with Officer Lucky at the time you pulled over the car. Fair?
I don't remember if we talked about it or not.
Okay. But in any case, you pull over the car, and Officer Lucky approaches the driver's side, approaches Mr. Wright, right?
Yes.
And he came back to the car with a name, date of birth, all kinds of information, right?
I know a name and a date of birth.
Well, Officer Lucky told you that he believed him. He thought that essentially that Mr. Wright was telling the truth, right?
Yes.
And then when Officer Lucky put in all this information into the system, you corrected him, you admonished him, you told him he was doing it wrong, right?
I told him better ways to do it, probably.
And that's your job as an FTO, right?
Yes.
To correct him if he messes something up, right?
Yes, when there was an opportunity.
So you corrected him, and then he re-entered the information, and then you found out about the warrant, right?
Yes.
Now, there was also a conversation about Officer Lucky code 4ing himself, right?
Doing what?
Code 4ing
Oh,
himself.
code 4ing, yes.
And did you also correct Officer Lucky for doing that?
He did it before he ran the driver, and he shouldn't do that.
And you told him that, right?
Yes,
Don't code 4 yourself before you have all the information, something to that effect, right?
yes,
And again, that was your job as the FTO to correct whatever he was doing that was wrong, right?
yes.
So you got this information and then made this decision to go arrest Mr. Wright, correct?
Yes.
And you didn't talk about going out there with guns drawn or anything like that. You didn't talk about using force on the approach or anything like that, right?
No.
And then Officer Lucky pulled or asked Mr. Wright to get out of the car, which he did, right?
Yes.
And you stood back and watched this happen, correct?
I was just a couple feet away.
Okay. But you didn't correct the way that that had happened. You didn't tell Officer Lucky to move or to put Mr. Wright somewhere else, right?
I wouldn't do that to a rookie in front of a suspect.
Okay. But you didn't do it regardless. Didn't happen.
No.
And then as you approached and got closer, was there a moment that you got closer after things didn't quite go the way you had hoped they would go?
I got closer before that happened.
Okay. And you'd agree that you unsnapped your gun holster as you approached, right?
No, I wouldn't agree to that.
All right, if we could put on the screen Exhibit 12, just the still image at 2:01:20, please. And zoomed in on, yes, the squad car view. You see yourself in that picture,
Yes.
and you see your right hand on the right side of your duty belt.
Yes.
And is your right hand on your firearm here?
It's blurry, but it's possible.
Okay. We can take that down, thank you. All right, so as you approached, and Mr. Wright got out of the car, was there a moment where it appeared that Mr. Wright was going to flee or attempt to flee?
When he started struggling with Officer Lucky.
Okay. And ultimately, was Mr. Wright able to get back in the car?
Yes.
You never saw a weapon on Mr. Wright, did you?
No.
Never saw a gun.
No.
He never threw a punch, right?
No.
Never kicked anyone.
No.
Never said, I'm going to kill you.
No.
Never said, I'm going to shoot you.
No.
Never said, there's a gun in the car and I'm coming after you.
No.
Okay. It's not uncommon in your experience to find someone who has a warrant during a traffic stop, right?
It's not uncommon.
And you've done hundreds of traffic stops in your career, correct?
I don't know if hundreds, but yes, I've done plenty of traffic stops.
And gross misdemeanor offenses are not the same as felony offenses, fair?
Correct. They're different order by the judge. There's
Less
a crime.
serious crimes, correct?
All crimes are serious, but yes.
Well, in terms of the laws of the state of Minnesota that you're duty bound to enforce, a gross misdemeanor is a lesser offense than a felony, correct?
Yes.
And you don't get to shoot someone because they have a gross misdemeanor warrant, correct?
Not for,
Your Honor, it depends on the circumstances.
Okay, but the objection is sustained.
As
The
the
jury will disregard that question.
You also testified about learning about an order for protection, correct?
yes,
You said it was a temporary one that you saw, correct?
I believe it was an ex parte order.
And essentially, the order that you're describing would limit contact between two people, correct?
Yes, in various ways.
It doesn't prohibit all contact with all members of the opposite sex, right?
Just certain parties that they're not supposed to have contact with.
Right. And you'd agree that half the world's population is female, right?
I suppose.
So just having a female passenger in your car is not in and of it and by itself a violation of an OFP, correct?
It has to be investigated.
Sure. And you did not see a need to rush up to the passenger side of the vehicle and pull this woman to safety, right?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Now, there was also some conversation, as you saw in the videos that were offered in court in this case, conversation about the Wright brothers. You made a comment about the Wright brothers joking about not the ones that fly, right?
Yes.
And then any concerns about whether there was some other Wright family in the area? Sergeant Johnson told you not that family, not this situation, right?
I wasn't sure who they were.
Okay. But he didn't cause you any greater, he didn't tell you this is the family we should be concerned about. We got to be worried about this guy, right?
No, he didn't say anything like that.
Okay. And when you got over to that car and Mr. Wright got back into the car was still running, right? It was running that whole time?
I don't know if it was on or not.
Well, you told Dr. Miller that the car was running, didn't you?
I don't remember that.
You told Dr. Miller that Wright pulled away and got back into the driver's seat of the car, which was still running.
Okay, then I said that.
And the entire time this is happening, you're standing behind Officer Lucky, right?
At what point?
As Mr. Wright is getting back in the car.
I came around Officer Lucky's left side to help him.
And you indicated that Sergeant Johnson had approached on the passenger side, but he wouldn't have been in front of the door because that would have been unsafe, right?
Yes.
Okay. I am going to put on the screen Exhibit 13, starting at 2:01:48, just that, if you could just leave it with that time frame, please. Okay, Ms. Potter, on the screen we have Exhibit 13 at 2:01:48. I'm going to slowly advance the frames and then pause it periodically. So let's advance just a bit. Okay, stopping right there. At 2:01:48, do you see yourself here taking a piece of paper in your left hand?
Yes.
All right, now advancing to 2:01:49, please. Okay, now stopping at 2:01:49, do you see that you've transferred that piece of paper to your right hand?
It looks like it.
You can advance a little further, please. Okay, would you agree that the piece of paper at 2:01:49 is in your right hand?
I don't know where it is.
Is this the piece of paper right here?
Yeah, it's a piece of paper.
All right, let's advance a couple more frames, please. Okay, stopping right there. Would you agree in this frame of 2:01:49 that the piece of paper is in your right hand?
Yes.
All right, and if we could play stopping at 2:01:54, please. Okay. And then if we could advance a few frames, please. At this point, the paper is in your right hand, correct?
Appears that way.
And then at 2:01:55, we could stop right there. You've just transferred the paper back to your left hand, correct?
That's what the video shows.
Okay. And then if we could advance a few more frames, please. To 2:01:56. A couple more frames, please. Okay, you'd agree at 2:01:56, the piece of paper is still in your left hand, correct?
Yes.
Okay, let's advance. Actually, let's play until 2:02:01, please. Okay, so stopping at 2:02:01. You have the firearm in your right hand, correct? Yes. And you are pointing it directly at Mr. Wright, correct?
Excuse me, Eric, do we have a break? My client is,
Okay. Miss Potter, do you need to take a break? Okay. It's lunch anyway, so. Okay, members of the jury, we're gonna break for lunch, and we'll start up again at 1:30, okay? Yes, you may step down. Okay.
We've seen some of the cross-examination of defendant and former police officer Kim Potter, but it is far from over. There's just going to be a lunch break in between. We have so much to say, and I know you do too. Stay right here with Court TV Live. We'll be back with analysis next. Thank you for being with us here on Court TV Live this Friday afternoon. Welcome back. I'm Julie Grant, your midday host. I know if you have been watching over the last hour or so, you have a lot to say probably, and we do too, as Kim Potter has taken the stand in her own defense in this case, a case that has seemed to go fairly well for Kim Potter until today. Perhaps. I want to bring in our guest to talk a little bit about what we've seen so far. We have criminal defense attorney Dawn Malarsic standing by in Akron, Ohio, and attorney and former radio host Rashini Rajkumar standing by in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where this trial is happening. Big welcome to you both. I want to just start with general reactions, general impressions, and then we're going to pick apart the direct, the cross, the body language, all of it. Dawn, let me begin with you, please.
Absolutely. I thought it was kind of a disaster up until that last moment. I just felt that Ms. Potter was really not showing any humanity, no vulnerability, no compassion, no empathy. She seemed mildly irritated and quite annoyed and felt kind of defensive, not only on cross, but on direct too, Julie. I don't think she scored any points here until the very end when we finally saw some humanity. We finally saw her with some true emotions. And I have to tell you, Earl Grey has done an amazing job, but he made, in my opinion, a huge mistake. You do not try to save your client. As difficult that is for a criminal defense attorney, you cannot ask the judge to break when your client is struggling emotionally. Only the jury can save your client. I would let that go for as long as the judge or the prosecutor let it go. But by jumping up and coming to her defense and stopping her in that emotional moment, I think the jury was denied her real humanity, which was all lacking in the entire day.
I couldn't agree more, Dawn. When he called for that break, I'm thinking, why? As you said, you let it play out. It should have been the prosecutor saying, let's take a break. We don't want the jury to see her crying, but not her defense attorney. I have so much to say about him, too. I want to pick your brain about that, Dawn, because I felt like he led her too much on direct. But first, Rashini, I want to get your general impressions, what you saw on the direct and the cross from Kim Potter.
Well, from Kim Potter, there was definitely a stark difference between when she was asked kind of the process, setting the scene testimony, and then when it got anywhere close to that actual shooting and what weapon she was drawing and that kind of thing. So we did see some emotion only during those times, but I absolutely agree with Dawn. It was really surprising that she was kind of cold to her own attorney. You would think that she would be allow him to sort of make her look human. Now, I do think to sort of give her a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, perhaps she's been shell-shocked watching all this, and then finally here she is, and she's staring at, some years in prison or not, and everything she says on the stand at that moment is going to make it or break it with the jury. So I think some real human emotion is inside. It's just too bad we didn't see more of it a little sooner.
Right, Rashini. Starting with the direct, my impressions were that Earl Grey led her too much. To me, he controlled her far too much. And when you have a witness like a police officer, they're almost like professional witnesses because they're in court many days of the week. We heard her talking a lot about what she does in the field, but she also probably has a lot of experience on the witness stand. And I felt like it came off so inauthentic, not just having her talk. I felt like the remorse was totally lacking. She had a sour expression on her face almost the whole time. And to me, the worst of it, Dawn, was that her attorney didn't go into a discussion with her about the mistake, the big thing that has her here in front of this jury. And the elements that the state has to prove involve things like her awareness, her consciously disregarding a risk and doing it anyways. And here I felt like I kept waiting and waiting for her to say, this was such an awful mistake and I am so sorry. And it never happened. The remorse never came and the talk about the mistake never came. Dawn, do you think that was some strategic lawyering decision by her team? Your thoughts, please.
Yeah, Julie, I think you're absolutely right. I can't just think of a rational, sane reason why you would leave that key part of the direct examination off the table. When he said no further questions, I was shell-shocked and nearly fell out of my chair. That is the key to your defense. And it's there, it's on video. She puts her hands on her face. She falls to the grass. She expresses remorse. she did such a good job, really, during the video of expressing a real emotion of remorse, and it was completely 100% absent on the record. I just don't get it. It didn't make any sense.
No, not at all. And we know she was prepared. I mean, we know. To me, maybe she got some bad coaching or something. I don't know. Rashini, let me tap into your experience with communication. That is what you do. With her, I remember seeing in the Minneapolis Star Tribune, one of the local newspapers where you are, quotes from her where she said she valued Daunte Wright's life and she prays for him and his family, and she's so sorry about this reprehensible mistake. And I'm paraphrasing here, I'm not exactly quoting, but when I read that, I got chills. I thought, oh, wow, she's going to be such a powerful witness. And then she got up on the stand, and tell me if you noticed this. Did you notice how she never called him by name? She called him the driver when she was communicating. Your thoughts, please, Rashini.
Exactly. I mean, there were so many ways the subtextual messages just went wrong here for Kim Potter today. I'm very surprised with the savvy of Earl Grey and Paul Eng that maybe they did coach her and she just didn't deliver. I'm a little surprised that Paul Eng didn't do the direct. You're absolutely correct, both of you, that Earl Grey led her a little too much. It was almost like he was this father kind of putting his arm around her and like, he say this, don't say that kind of a thing. But really, that mistake piece, I just think that was such a lost opportunity for messaging. And I don't know if I missed some motions on use of video today, but I would have brought out that video. I would have stressed that she said she wanted to kill herself. I mean, those are the real visceral things that we've seen a couple times today on the stand, but that video and her actual words on the scene would have helped the jury feel for her today.
Absolutely. I think the jury wants to know, is she sorry? I know if I were on that jury, that would probably be the simplest thing I would want an answer to. Is she sorry about this? And looking at her, I mean, there's so much we can take away, but I don't know that we've seen true remorse. Maybe there were some tears at some points, and we just stopped right in the middle of some tears in this cross. But I want to talk to you both more about it. I'm being told we're going to squeeze in a break. We're going to dive in more to the remorse aspect and to what we've seen so far on the cross-examination of Kim Potter right after this. Thank you for being with us here on Court TV. Thank you for being with us here on Court TV Live this Friday afternoon. I'm Julie Grant, your midday host. Court's on a quick break in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the trial of Kim Potter. She is accused of 2 counts of manslaughter for the shooting death of Daunte Wright. Her testimony is everything in this case. She is the only person in the whole wide world who can tell the jury what exactly she was thinking when she fired her gun instead of her taser, when there's an overwhelming amount of evidence showing that she meant to fire the taser, but in fact fired her Glock, killing 22-year-old Daunte Wright. I want to bring in our guest to talk more about what we're seeing from Kim Potter on the witness stand. We have with us in Akron, Ohio, criminal defense attorney Don Malarsic, and joining us in Minneapolis, Minnesota, attorney and media personality Roshini Rajkumar. Thank you both for being here on the program today. I want to start where we kind of left off before the break, and that is with remorse or a lack of remorse from Kim Potter. Roshini, let me begin with you, if I may, please. Assessing her expressions and listening to her words, watching her body language. Tell me what you saw on the direct and on the cross from her.
So we've noticed that she has shown some emotion at a couple key moments, and usually those moments have to do when we're looking at video as on the cross of the car, and you see Daunte Wright's body, and you see her kind of having a physical shaking. And this dawned on me during the direct because such different facial expressions when she was asked questions about process and procedure versus that day, April 11th. So I've got to wonder if there's some PTSD going on, those kinds of things, because the forensic psychologist really was set up in that direct testimony to show that she had a major lapse, an emotional gap, and that's what caused the mistake. But unfortunately, Earl Grey did not bring that home during his direct of her.
Roshini, I'm so glad you brought that up. Thank you for that, because that is the perfect lead into a question I have for Dawn. Dawn, I had and we love all of you viewers who are watching from home, sending in comments, via Twitter or other social platforms for Court TV, and had one from someone who said, I'm not really seeing Kim Potter as coming off as sour, because I believe I use the word sour in her expression because that's how she looks to me. This viewer said she appears to be depressed to me, and I have some experience working with people who suffer from depression, and I thank the viewer for that insight. And, we all see things differently, and we see things through our own experiences. Dawn, my question to you is, if she is depressed, we know Earl Grey brought out the fact that she's been in therapy since this incident, but he didn't ask her what she's suffering from. Tell me, if it is depression, is he really dropping the ball here, not letting the jury know that? Because they may be mistaking that expression the way I am watching Kim Potter and not thinking like someone who very well might be a mental health professional who tweeted at me.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think the viewer is absolutely right. And there's no doubt in my mind that Miss Potter has suffered a traumatic experience, and she is feeling the effects of that. What I feel is that she is afraid of her emotion. And she's afraid to let those emotions show. And if you don't explain to the jury and show the jury those real emotions, they're going to perceive her as uncaring and unemotional and likely to convict. I'm sure that her detached, objective testimony has served her well as a police officer. But unfortunately, when she doesn't access those emotions here, it could very well convict her. And it's really the defense attorney's job, as you said, Julie, to work with the therapist, get the therapist involved, sit around in your office and go through that and allow her to be comfortable expressing real emotion. What we saw there, she was afraid to express those emotions, and the attorney felt like he was afraid to see them, and he jumped up and he tried to save her. That's not the way you conduct this type of witness.
Right, exactly. Tell me, Roshini, as far as the storytelling, it seems like there was the build-up to what everybody wanted to hear about, which was the April 11th incident. And then, and I'm quoting her directly, she said, I remember yelling, taser, 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 and nothing happened. And then he told me I shot him. And then there wasn't much, if anything else, that she said after that point. Sitting back, watching it with a discerning eye as you are, were you hoping she was going to say more about the story?
Absolutely. I mean, it's like you brought us to the edge of the cliff And now we want to know all those answers that were happening as you supposedly fell off this cliff as an officer by telling us that you thought you were pulling your taser. We really needed more. And even if she forgot what happened from that moment, which, by the way, is a very human reaction, and that would make her story even more believable. But Earl Grey needed to explore that more. We needed to understand more about her state of mind, that she really did believe she was drawing the taser. There was also a point that I think they could have brought out more, and that was when she looked into Johnson's eyes and saw something she had never seen before: fear. That is something that completely could have been brought out more to show why she was just sort of not herself. She, mistakenly drew the taser or the gun instead of the taser, and she was protecting her colleague. So all of those things could have been explored, and it was like that movie where you're expecting a certain climax, and we just did not get that today.
Exactly. Exactly. I was left so disappointed and wanting so much more on that direct. And really, it's on the lawyers. You both know that. You're both attorneys. You understand. And Dawn, you in particular, having spent a career as a trial attorney, I mean, you know how critical it is to tell your story. And when you have a client up on the stand and then don't do that, and probably members of the jury are thinking like we are, like, well, what else? What else? What are we missing? It could be a huge problem. We've got to say goodbye to Roshini Rajkumar. Roshini, thank you so much for being on the program today. Appreciate you joining us. Don Malarsik's going to stay with us. We want you to do the same. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Court TV Live this Friday afternoon. I'm your midday host, Julie Grant, and it's great to have you along with us as we are standing by for more of the cross-examination of defendant Kim Potter. She took the stand in her own defense today. She's charged with 2 counts of manslaughter in the first and second degree, for the shooting death of 20-year-old Daunte Wright. It was during a traffic stop back in April when she mistook her firearm for her taser. Let's take a look together at some of her testimony just a short time ago.
And did you hear what Officer Lucky said?
Yes, I heard him ask the driver to step out of the vehicle a couple of times.
And did the driver step out of the vehicle finally?
Finally, he asked Officer Lucky a couple of times what was going on, and Officer Lucky said he would explain to him.
When he got out of the car?
Yes,
And so did the driver get out of the car?
yes.
And what do you remember happening next?
Officer Lucky had him turn around, and I think he was still asking what was going on. Sergeant John,
Who's he?
the driver,
Go ahead.
and Sergeant Johnson and Lucky told him he was under arrest, and I told him he had a warrant.
Okay, so who said he was under arrest first?
Sergeant Johnson, I believe.
And Sergeant Johnson testified here. You remember that?
Yes.
And after he said that, did Officer Lucky say he was under arrest too?
Yes.
And you heard that?
Yes.
And what did you say then?
I told him he had a I told him he had a warrant.
You just said warrant?
I think so.
Did you specify what kind of warrant, if you remember? If you don't?
I don't think I would have. It wouldn't have been in my normal.
Okay, so what happened after Johnson and Lucky said you're going to be handcuffed or you're under arrest, and you said that there was a warrant? What happened next?
Officer Lucky had him put his hands behind his back, and I noticed that in the driver's right hand was something. It was paper or something, and I took it out of his hand and had it in my left hand.
And you had that in your left hand?
Yes.
And then what happened next? Why strike that? When you did that, I take it you got closer to the driver?
Yes. I reached into the driver's hand and took out what he had in his right hand.
Right hand or left hand?
His right hand, and I held it in my left hand.
Okay. What happened next?
Officer Lucky started to say something about, don't do that, don't tense up, stop doing that. And then it just went chaotic.
What do you remember happening after that?
I remember a struggle with Officer Lucky and the driver at the door. The driver was trying to get back into the car.
Well, he was trying to get back in the car. What did you do?
I went around Officer Lucky as they're trying to get back in the door. I'm between the door and Officer Lucky and the driver. And the driver's getting into the car.
And what happened next?
They're still struggling, and I can see Sergeant Johnson and the driver struggling over the gear shift, because I can see Johnson's hand, and then I can see his face.
And you knew Johnson for many years before this, is that right?
Yes.
And by looking at his face at that point in time, what did you interpret it to mean?
He had a look of fear on his face. It's nothing I'd seen before.
Did you say anything when you saw this? What did you do?
We were struggling. We were trying to keep him from driving away. It just went chaotic. And then I remember yelling, "Taser, taser, taser," and nothing happened. And then he told me I shot him.
can you proceed or you?
Yes, it's fine.
What do you think of what we just saw from Kim Potter there? And that was just a little glimpse of it, but that was the part where she got the most emotional on the stand. The second time we saw emotion from her was during the cross-examination right before her attorney asked the court for a break. And the judge said, well, it is about that time to go to lunch, sent everyone off for lunch. And our guest on the program made the excellent point that if your client is showing emotion when they're accused of such a serious crime like this, you let that go. You shouldn't have called for a break. But he did, and we want to unpack more of what we saw on that cross-examination before the break with that guest criminal defense attorney Daunte Malarsic on the program today. Daunte also teaches trial advocacy. He's coached trial advocacy. It's something he knows well. Daunte, that was an excellent point you made, that her attorney shouldn't have disrupted that emotion because we really haven't seen much of it from her. And so I want to ask you to really focus with me on the cross-examination and what we did see coming from her when she was being questioned by the state. What were your impressions, please?
Well, my impression was, again, she seemed mildly irritated and annoyed. She was defensive. And, every time that I teach trial advocacy or I prepare for a trial, I start with a quote from Maya Angelou. And that is, people will soon forget what you said to them, but they will always remember how you made them feel. So what I teach lawyers is, how do you want the jury to feel when your client is done testifying? And here, in this case, you want the jury to feel this woman made an honest mistake and she feels bad for it. She feels remorse over it. And the lawyer just failed in getting that point across and allowing the jury to experience that. And I believe you're right. It's on the lawyer to prepare the witness to do that. And I think, unfortunately, Attorney Gray failed.
Right. And I know that he is very highly regarded in the Minneapolis area. We know he's on another high-profile case representing Thomas Lane, one of Derek Chauvin's co-defendants in George Floyd's killing. But this was very, very disappointing. Something that jumped out at me, Dawn, and you're the perfect person to talk to about this. I felt like Kim Potter was disagreeing with the prosecutor when she didn't need to disagree with her. There were so many questions that were not very damaging. Things about training and the extensiveness of the training and things that she really couldn't deny. For instance, when the video's up on the screen and she's saying, now this paper's no longer in your left hand, is it? And you see her left hand's bare and she's, well, it appears that way. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? You're doing yourself no favors by this. Dawn, tell me, when it comes to cross-exam, when you're a witness, how do you prep your clients in teaching them when to fight on something and when to concede?
Well, we rehearse it and we practice it. And I will tell my client, no one will be a more aggressive cross-examiner than me when we practice this. And no one will be able to question you more thoroughly than me. So let's go through it. And you prepare your client for everything. And once you've run through this and you see a client who wants to fight and wants to disagree and correct you and stop you on these minor points that don't mean anything, you have to say, wait, stop, time out. You understand what you're doing here, why you're doing it. Let me explain to you that that's not effective. The other thing you do, Julie, is you bring in a focus group. I mean, we as lawyers, we fall in love with our clients. We overlook the problems that everyone else in the world sees. So you bring in a focus group and you walk your client through a direct and a mock cross-examination, and then you get feedback from the jurors. What worked here? What didn't? How did you feel about this witness? Were they defensive? Were they believable? Were they remorseful? And then you use that to continue to prepare. And it feels like had that been done here, we would have seen a very different direct and cross-examination of this father.
Exactly. Daunte Malarsic, great insight from you as always. Thank you kindly. You're going to stay with us. We want you to do the same at home. Please, we're going to squeeze in a break. More coverage of the trial of former officer Kim Potter is next. Welcome back to Court TV Live, your front row seat to justice. I'm Julie Grant. We are closely analyzing the testimony of the defendant in this case in Minneapolis, former officer Kim Potter. We know she fatally shot Daunte Wright on April 11th of this past spring. The incident occurred during the Derek Chauvin trial. Her case is taking place in the same courtroom where Derek Chauvin was tried. This is video of her up on the stand, testifying, and where we left off, she's in the middle of the cross-examination. Let me bring in our guest analyst on the program right now, criminal defense attorney Dawn Malarsic, to talk a little more about some of the things we're seeing. And a big thank you to all of you viewers watching here in the United States and in the United Kingdom, where Court TV is broadcast as well. You're sending in really great questions, great observations. And one of them we talk about with every defendant. So this is nothing particular to Kim Potter. For anybody who thinks that we're about to pick on Kim Potter, no. We always talk about optics and the way a defendant is dressed coming into court. Dawn, got to talk about this. A lot of people making comments on Twitter here. We've seen every day she comes in similar clothing as she has on today. She wears a cardigan sweater and some type of blouse underneath. Never have I ever seen her, at least I don't recall, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, in a suit at any point during the case. Now, we know suits are typical in criminal court, or in any court, I should say. It shows great respect for the decorum, but occasionally you do see people wearing sweaters as she is here. To me, Dawn, I had a guest on the program a few days ago who said, I think this is deliberate. I think they want to paint the picture that Kim Potter is a mom, and this looks more like something like a mom might wear on any given day. Maybe they don't want her to look like a police officer or look, too official or too professional. To me, I thought, okay, that might be a good idea. But then when I heard her speaking, she's testifying like a police officer. I'm not hearing mom coming from her. I know she said she was a mom, but I'm really not getting that kind of testimony. She's testifying like a cop, using verbiage like the driver instead of calling him by his name, Daunte Wright. Tell me, did that jump out at you at all in terms of like mixed messaging with the optics and the attire and the way she's conducting herself?
Julie, I think you're absolutely right. There's a real disconnect in what we hear and what we see. And my suspicion is that over the course of her 26 years, and as a former prosecutor, she has probably testified hundreds, if not thousands of times, going into grand jury and suppression trial and bond hearings, etc. So she is comfortable, I'm sure, testifying as a police officer. And I can understand why the defense might want to have her look like a mom, but you're right. There's this disconnect into who she really is and what are we seeing, and it's not consistent with what we're hearing. I think it's a big mistake. I think you need to present her as a professional witness. She is. That's where she's comfortable. That's what she's been doing for 26 years. And the clothes just are not what the message is. When she's talking and when she's testifying, it's inconsistent and it's troubling.
Yes. Dawn, let us please pick your brain about something else, and I have to credit our wonderful line producer of this show, Valerie Thurman, for raising this. She was saying how we know the defense started off the direct by detailing all of Kim Potter's accolades, going through her training and experience, and so much of what she's done has been impressive. She was a crisis negotiator, going, for those at home who might be wondering, would go out on SWAT calls, negotiate with whomever the perpetrator is to let the victim go. She was invested in the domestic violence response team, helping victims of domestic violence. She's part of the Law Enforcement Honor Guard. She's done a lot of good, and she's got a lot of really great things to share with this jury beyond this horrific incident. And Valerie was raising the point, does this cut both ways for the defense, and how should the defense properly handle this? And I said, Valerie, this is a great question. I'm going to ask Dawn Malarsic this, because he's a master of this and how to frame this. Because folks listening to it on the jury might be thinking, well, gosh, you've done so much and been involved in so much. How in the world can you make the mistake with your gun thinking it was your taser? Dawn, talk to us, please, about what the defense should be doing.
I think Valerie should get a raise. I think she absolutely is right. She hit it right on the head. And the problem is, and you can see, this is exactly where the cross-examination started. So this is a key point that the prosecution wants to get out. If I'm the defense and I start with her, the first question I talk about, or the first series of questions, is tell me how hard it is to be a police officer and what are the struggles in being a police officer. That's where you really want to focus. This is a difficult job. You talk about that in voir dire, you talk about that in open, you talk about that with other witnesses who are police officers. So you stress the difficult split decisions that you have to make in the moment when it's not training and it's not slowed down and the stakes are incredibly high. I think that's where you focus. But having her talk about her training and all this experience, I think was a mistake. And it really undercut the idea of this was a woman who never wanted to hurt anyone and made a terrible, tragic mistake. She feels awful.
Exactly. Dawn, when she was detailing those moments that everybody wanted to hear about, those intense moments, did you expect to hear her say an apology of some sort and offer some kind of an explanation as to how the mistake occurred?
Absolutely. You know, what we saw in the direct examination, I felt, was a narrative. What happened next? What did you do? Well, the jury has seen the video dozens and dozens of times. They know what she did. What was missing in the opportunity for direct examination was to talk about, all right, in this moment, what were you thinking? In this moment, Ms. Potter, what were you feeling? After this happened, what were you feeling? And those were the questions that we were left really guessing at. And you don't want the jury guessing at your client's emotions or thoughts because oftentimes they're going to get it wrong.
Exactly, Dawn. I felt like there were so many moments where she could have added something more when she's not remembering details or what it was like that day. When we come back after this break, we're going to show the part of the testimony where it's brought out that she didn't test her taser the day she started her shift on April 11th, 2021, and how that plays in to the facts at hand, whether it affects what the jury will ultimately find in terms of the facts of this case. Stay with Court TV Live, your front row seat to justice. Welcome back to Court TV Live, your front row seat to justice. I'm Julie Grant. We're waiting for Kim Potter to get back on the witness stand. She'll be on cross-examination for some more from Assistant Attorney General Erin Eldridge. She is handling the cross-examination for the state of Minnesota. We want to play for you some testimony that may provide some details that we know the jury will have to carefully consider when it comes time to deliberate. And that is about the fact that on the day Kim Potter embarked on her shift as field training officer of another officer, she did not test her taser. There are records of that, and it was brought out both on direct and on cross. Here's a look back at that now.
There's been evidence in the case that you had a Taser 7, is that correct?
Yes.
And the evidence in that was that the Taser 7 was shaped like a gun, fair statement?
Yes.
And the Taser 7 had a dark black, or at least a dark handle, and a dark top. Do you remember that? I'm trying.
The objection is overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
The Taser that you received, was it approximately a month before April 11th that you received this Taser? Do you remember?
In the courtroom, I was told I received it on March the 26th.
Okay. And also, while we're there, with respect to these tasers and testing them, the rule that we read said should test the electronics every day. Is that right?
Yes.
And there is testimony that you didn't test yours a couple days. Is that right?
Yes, that's what I was told.
And do you agree with that you didn't test it?
I don't recall if I would have or wouldn't have.
And was that an important feature for law enforcement officers with new tasers
No.
that never used them since they had them?
Correct.
And while we're there, did you ever use a taser, use it by actually shooting it in all of your years' career as a law enforcement officer?
I would take my taser out on rare occasions, but I don't believe I ever deployed it.
Okay, when you take your taser out, it's to de-escalate what is going on. Is that a fair statement?
Sometimes, or to prepare for what might be behind a door. Sometimes an officer has a gun and sometimes an officer has a taser out.
That last statement really troubled me, and this is why. If you don't know what is behind a door, you're not going to have a taser in your hand to prepare for it. You're going to have your firearm, which is lethal force, in case there is lethal force awaiting you behind the door. Ask any police officer if you don't want to take my word for it. Let me bring in our guest to analyze more of what we just saw. Their criminal defense attorney, Daunte Malarczyk. Daunte, anything you would like to add on that point I just made? And also, I just want your impressions overall of everything we just saw her saying here when she's asked about not testing that taser.
It's not a point for the defense. I think it was really a point for the prosecution, and here's why. The reason why we want our police officers to test the equipment is obviously to make sure that it works, but also you want to go through the process of taking the taser out of the holster, looking at it, and then consciously or subconsciously you're registering things like, well, this is different than my gun. It weighs different. It feels different. It looks different. It's a different color. It's on a different side. I mean, there's a reason why basketball players take the court and they take all those warm-up shots. Steph Curry and LeBron James aren't going to get infinitesimally better just because of 5 or 6 warm-up shots. You get out, you get on the court, you get a feel for the ball, you look at the court, you get the temperature of the room, you look at the lighting, and it just puts you in the right mind frame. Here, the officer testified that for days and days, in violation of her own policy, she never even thought of, looked at, or tested her taser. And I think it explains why she made such a horrific mistake, whether it was negligence or reckless conduct. If you don't test what you're supposed to test days before it, it doesn't bode well when you're saying this was just an accident. It wasn't negligence. It wasn't recklessness.
Excellent analysis from you, as always. Daunte Malarczyk, thank you kindly. We just got word that the defendant has entered the courtroom, which means the jury is not far behind. We're going to squeeze in a break. We'll be back live next. Everyone is on their feet in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the courtroom where Kim Potter is being tried for manslaughter. Now the attorneys are taking their seats, except for Aaron Eldridge, who's about to continue the cross-examination of Kim Potter. And when they left off, she had started breaking down. She had started crying. She's obviously composed herself during that hour-long lunch break. Let's listen.
Before we left for the break, we were walking through what happened on April 11th. You'd agree that for a large part of the interaction at the side of the car with Mr. Wright, you were standing behind Officer Lucky, right?
I was next to him at some point.
Okay. And you testified on direct that after you saw a scared look in Sergeant Johnson's face, that's why you decided to use the taser? That was your testimony?
Yes.
But you also told Dr. Miller that you don't know why you decided to use the taser, right?
I haven't seen his report.
Would it refresh your recollection to see his report?
Yes, please.
May I approach your honor?
You may.
Did you have a chance to look at that, Ms. Potter?
Yes.
And did you see the portion where it explains, when asked by this examiner why she decided to draw her taser, Officer Potter states, "I don't have an answer. My brain said grab the taser." Do you recall that?
I don't recall it, but it's in his paperwork.
So on April 11th, you reached down and drew your weapon, right?
Yes.
And you said taser, 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 so Officer Lucky and Sergeant Johnson would disengage, right?
Yes.
And they did disengage, didn't they? They let go of Daunte Wright and stepped back?
According to the video.
And after you shot Daunte Wright, you
I don't remember.
if that's what's in the video, that's what you said, right?
Yes.
And you said that there are a lot of things that you don't remember, and that on direct you testified that your memory came back when you saw your husband that day. But didn't you tell Dr. Miller that you remember seeing the gun in your right hand? You said that, right?
I don't remember my interview with him. I was distraught. I wasn't in a good place.
After you shot Daunte Wright, you didn't behave like someone who had just saved Sergeant Johnson's life, did you?
I was very distraught. I just shot somebody. I've never done that.
Well, you never asked Sergeant Johnson if he was okay, right?
I don't remember the conversations.
You didn't check in on him at all, right?
I don't know.
Well, you saw the video when Sergeant Johnson fed you the line, "That guy was trying to take off with me." You didn't bite, right? You didn't respond to that at all, did you?
The video, I was crying. I was in shock.
And he was trying to make you feel better, wasn't he?
Back to that foundation is.
The objection is sustained.
Well, he didn't remember saying it, right? You heard that testimony?
Yes.
And you don't remember him saying that, right?
No.
And you didn't say anything like, thank God I shot that guy and saved your life. You didn't say anything like that, right?
The objection is overruled.
You didn't say that, right?
No.
And you didn't ask Sergeant Johnson anything except to call Chuck, right?
I don't remember what I asked him.
That would be on the video, right?
Yes.
You'd agree that as a police officer, you have the duty to render aid and communicate information to other officers, right?
Yes.
And it's part of your job to assist those who are hurt or injured, true?
Yes.
And to communicate to other officers what you know about a particular scene, right?
Yes.
Give them whatever information you can to help them do their jobs, to help render assistance, things like that, right?
Yes.
But you didn't do any of those things on April 11th, did you?
No.
You stopped doing your job completely. You didn't communicate what happened over the radio, right?
No.
You didn't make sure any officers knew what you had just done, right?
No.
You didn't run down the street and try to save Daunte Wright's life, did you?
No.
You didn't check on the other car that had been hit, did you?
No.
That all happened just down the road from you.
Yes.
You were focused on what you had done, because you had just killed somebody, right?
I'm sorry it happened. I'm so sorry.
Ms. Potter, from your reaction today, and from your reaction on your video, you didn't plan to use deadly force that day, did you?
No.
You didn't want to use deadly force, did you?
That's irrelevant. If you planned it or wanted it, it's a constructive affair.
The objection is overruled.
You can't.
No. No.
Because you knew that deadly force was unreasonable and unwarranted in those circumstances.
I didn't want to hurt anybody.
You didn't want to hurt anybody. And you didn't want to kill anybody.
No.
And that's why you said, I'm going to go to prison.
I don't.
That's 3 times now, Your Honor. Repetition.
All right. The objection is sustained.
Ms. Potter, you know the difference between left and right, don't you?
That's objective now. She's asked that before, it's argumentative.
It's not been asked, Your
The
Honor.
objection is sustained. It's argumentative.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Ms. Potter, do you need a break?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, Johnson, lucky. Just going to ask you a few questions. Do you remember your visit by Zoom with Dr. Miller? A little bit at least.
We had a Zoom interview, yes.
Okay, and that was Miller in Florida, correct, as far as we know?
Yes.
And you and me were in my office, correct?
Yes.
And that was the first time that you had ever seen any of the video, correct?
Yes.
And were you able to watch it?
No.
And you did tell Mr. Miller that when Wright pulled away and got back into the driver's seat of the car, which was still running, Potter that you could observe Johnson and Lucky struggling over the console, and it appeared that Johnson was trying to prevent Wright from putting the car in drive.
Objection, leading. The objection is overruled.
If you don't remember that, because it was a while ago, I can show it to you to refresh your memory.
I don't remember.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Read to yourself, Ms. Potter, the last sentence of the second to the last paragraph. Does that refresh your memory as to what you told him?
Yes.
And did you tell him that? Pardon me, I didn't hear you.
If it's in there, I must have. That day is so blurry.
Did you also tell them that you yelled taser, 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 so your partners would disengage from Wright?
Yes.
And just a few more questions here. Would it be routine, thinking back when you're a law enforcement officer for 26 years, would it be routine for you to unsnap your holster on the way to a car?
No.
And why not?
I'm only 5'3". If I would get into a fight, I could lose my gun.
Did you ever, in your career, shoot your gun at anybody?
No.
Did you ever shoot your gun in real life during your career?
No.
And did you ever shoot your taser during your career?
It was never deployed.
Is that what it means?
Yes.
And that would be real life. That would be, when you have to use those weapons, that would mean it was an emergency situation, would it not? Well, what would it mean to you?
Objection is sustained. I'll rephrase it.
Yeah, sorry, thank you, Judge. What would that mean to you if you had to shoot your weapon?
That I might kill somebody.
When you three law enforcement officers, and excuse me, by the way, as far as reporting this shooting, would it be Sergeant Johnson, your boss, would be the one that would be required to do that?
Objection, leading.
Well, rephrase
rephrase
it.
that. Who would be required, according to policy, to report the shooting? Would it be the shooter or the other person who was in charge there?
On that scene, it would have been Sergeant Johnson.
Because he was your supervisor, correct?
Yes.
Then I got a couple more questions. If you stopped a vehicle in Brooklyn Center and you learned that there was a bench warrant for a weapons violation, you learned that there was a temporary restraining order a female had lodged against the person that said he was in the car, that gave his identity, but he really did Mr. Wright ever give a valid identification for himself?
No.
And the other office, now you've got no valid information, you've got a gross misdemeanor, you got a temporary restraining order, you got marijuana smelled by your partner, you got no license, no insurance. Would you let that car go if you went up to it and were attempting to handcuff the individual and the car, he jumped back in? Would you have thought you should let him go, drive down the street?
No.
On the temporary restraining order, if you learn there is a temporary restraining order, is it protocol is it policy to, as soon as you learn that, jump out of the passenger side, run up to the car and ask the lady what her name was? Has that ever been heard of in police practice that you know of?
No.
Thank you, ma'am. That's all I have, Judge.
Is there any recross?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Potter, you were asked about some statements that you made to Dr. Miller on redirect, right?
Yes.
You also told Dr. Miller that you resigned on April 12th to protect your police family, right?
Judge, I object to this improper re-cross-examination. I never got into that. I just got
Okay,
into one statement.
Your Honor, the statements to Dr.
Yes.
Miller are at issue.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You may answer that.
You told him that, right?
Can you repeat the question?
You told Dr. Miller that you resigned on April 12th to protect your police family, right?
If it's in the report, yes. I haven't seen the report except today.
Well, if it's in the report that you also said that they're very important people to you, would that be accurate?
Yes.
You have a very close relationship with the police officers, other individuals you work with or used to work with at Brooklyn Center, right?
Some of them.
Sergeant Johnson is a good friend of yours.
Judge, I object to this and outside the scope.
The objection is sustained beyond the scope.
You also told Dr. Miller that you don't make mistakes, right? You told him that?
If it's in the report, yes.
And you told him that you don't want to hurt or injure anybody. Right?
Right?
But you mentioned to Dr. Miller your relationship with the individuals that you work with, right?
Yes.
And that was very important to you, right?
Yes.
You advocated for their interests in a lot of settings, didn't you, for the people that you worked with?
I advocate for everybody.
You had a very close relationship with them. You referred to Sergeant Johnson as a rock star, haven't you?
I don't know when I would have done that.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Go ahead, Mr. Gray.
In all of your years there as experienced in all of the patrols that you conducted, did you have to rely on your partners for assistance anytime you did a stop or an investigation of any nature?
Yes.
And that would be the family of the police department at Brooklyn Center, correct?
Yes.
And they were your second family, weren't they?
Yes.
As far as complaints, in the 26 years that you were a police officer, did you ever have one citizen complaint?
Objection, Your Honor, outside the scope.
The objection is sustained beyond the scope.
I have no further questions.
Any further cross?
No, Your Honor.
All right. You may step down.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wes.
Does the state have rebuttal?
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Does the state have any rebuttal witnesses the defense has rested?
We do not, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Members of the jury, all the testimony is in. So what's going to happen is that on Monday morning, I'm going to give you the instructions of law you need to apply in rendering your verdict, and then the attorneys will have a chance to do their final arguments to you. Now, so we're starting on Monday. I've got to read the cautionary long version again so that you don't do any research. Don't let outsiders influence you. This includes family members and friends and anyone else who is not actually involved in this trial. Don't discuss the case with other jury members during the trial. Again, you'll have plenty of time to do this at the end of the trial. Once you have had all the evidence, I've sent you to the jury room with my instructions and the verdict forms. Don't talk to anyone involved in the case, of course, the defendant, the lawyers, or the witnesses. If anyone tries to discuss this case with you outside the courtroom, please report this to me. When you go home over the weekend, do not talk to your family, friends, or others about the case. You may tell them that you are a juror on a criminal case, and that is all that you should tell them. Do not report your experiences as a juror while the trial and deliberations are going on. Do not email, blog, tweet, text, or post anything to Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Google, YouTube, or other social networking sites about this trial, even if I have not specifically mentioned other social media sites. Don't visit any chat rooms where this case may be discussed. Do not read or listen to news reports on newspapers, magazine, radio, television, podcasts, or other media about this case. Don't do your own investigation.
So there we have it. All of the evidence we are going to see in Kim Potter's trial is in. The jury is going to be sent home for the weekend to return Monday to hear the closing arguments before they go to deliberate. I want to extend a big thank you to our guest analyst on the program today, criminal defense attorney Dawn Malarczyk in Akron, Ohio, watching along with us. And a big thank you to you watching at home. My time is done here. Stay right here, though we have lots more legal analysis and arguments ahead on Court TV.